Welcome to Routing for Success, the show where we interview today's top logistics professionals, giving them a platform to share their stories and best practices. Today we are talking with Rick Dunn, FedEx linehaul contractor through his company DXP Group and consultant through his business Linehaul Solutions. Rick holds an MBA and got his start in the trucking business as a side hustle while working a full-time job in law enforcement. At the peak of his business, Rick and his partner had over 60 trucks in operation. He's made every business blunder out there and wants to help others learn from his mistakes, helping new contractors navigate the intricacies of running a scaled logistics enterprise. Without further ado, I give you Rick Dunn. Okay, we are here with Rick Dunn. Rick is a FedEx linehaul contractor with DXP and also owner of Linehaul Solutions. Rick, thanks for being here.
Man, thanks for having me. Good morning. Good early morning to you. Thanks for getting up crack of dawn to talk to me.
Oh, I always get started early for sure. Well, I appreciate you being here. So before we dive into the business side of things, which we'll definitely spend plenty of time talking about that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background? I'd like to know, where did you grow up? What was your upbringing like? What was your educational experience like? Whether or not you went to school, if you did, where did you go? What did you study? And maybe even a little bit about what your professional background was like before you got into linehaul.
Oh God, how much time do we have? So, I grew up in Miami, Florida. Love it. One of my favorite places on earth to this day. And, I grew up in the 80s, early 90s in Miami. Fun time, still have family, best friends, all live down there still. And when I was in high school, I was in 9th grade going into my 10th grade year, right? High school, my braces had just come off. My skin's getting clear. I mean, I'm ready to just conquer South Florida. My parents set me down and they're like, oh, hey, by the way, we're going to be moving to Kennesaw, Georgia, little suburb outside of Atlanta. And I was like, well, hell no, I'm not moving. But eventually, obviously, we moved. And then so Atlanta now, I think I consider home at this point. Settled there and we went to high school there. All of my best friends, from there, still keep in touch with most of them, have a nice little crew. And I kind of started into the business world. Out of college, I went to, I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it at this point, but Kennesaw State University. And I was one of the ones who, hey, I'm going to go there for a year and then transfer to a bigger school. End up liking it and stayed there, got my master's degree, MBA from Kennesaw as well. Got into the mortgage industry in 2006 and 7, and it was absolutely phenomenal, right? Like you couldn't help but make a bunch of money. So I get out of school and I'm doing mortgages for Wells Fargo, and life was great for a couple of years. I thought that was, money was just that easy at the time. And then, I got my first experience in the game of life when, that recession, that kind of housing bubble burst. And so for me, like growing up, everybody has, what do you want to be when you grow up? I always wanted to be a cop, like a cop, like driving around cars, helping people. And whether it was, whatever law enforcement gig at the time I wanted to do was always related to that, like I was into Miami Vice. I wanted to be a detective. And with that, I think coming out of the mortgage experience and not wanting to really do like such aggressive sales anymore, working these monster hours and constantly looking for that next big payday. I started applying for the local PDs, and they just didn't pay much. I want to say like an Atlanta cop would make like in the 30s, low 30s at the time. And coming out of, where I had just been at, early mid 20s, it's like, I'm not taking that kind of pay cut. So I applied to law school. I was going to go to UGA, took my LSATs, got in, and I was getting ready to start. But in part of my looking for law enforcement gigs, I had applied for federal stuff, and I actually got the job to be work for the TSA as an air marshal. And it happened at the same time. It's like August, and like, well, school's starting. But hey, I also have this job that pays significantly better than the local PD also. So I had to decide, and it didn't take much for me to say, I'm not going back to school. Like, this sucks. So I packed a bag, went to New York, stayed with a friend for a couple of weeks, and just started my entirely new life. Working for the government, law enforcement, and just loved it. Met the best people, trained significant, training was phenomenal, lots of fun, and I got to travel the world for quite a while, and loved it. And so I think I'd probably still be doing that today, but unfortunately, my body just couldn't handle it. Hurt my lower back, and I'm fine now, but it just took me a long time to recover and get to the point where I could like sit on a plane for that long. So here I am today, owning some FedEx routes. I'm sure we'll get into that, how I stumbled to that, but that's kind of my backstory wrapped up nice and neat.
Yeah, well, let's get into that. And that's definitely an interesting background. I think it takes a unique personality type to go out and get an MBA, a master's in business administration, but then also want to go be something like a police officer, which is, at least to me, completely different. And then all the way to where you are today. I think that's definitely interesting. Thank you for telling us about that.
I assume I'm a little older than you are. But I was, when September 11th happened, I was 18, 19. And so for a lot of guys my age, it's like you had a response, like everybody responded to that in their own way. So for me, it was, I was like, all right, you know what? All my buddies are running, joining the military. I'm going to do the same thing. That was, I think, the path that I was on. And I got pretty deep into it. Had to take not the SATs, whatever one specific, the ASVAB, but ready to sign. And my parents actually talked me out of it at the time. They're like, look, finish college and then, do go in. And they had done a bunch of research. You could go in as like an EW4. I at this point, I don't remember the designations, but that was kind of why I didn't do that. And so that was carryover. It's like, all right, you know what? I'm still going to get into law enforcement at the time, but it's just one of those things where at an early age, that's what my goals were. And it never went away. So I no matter kind of where I went in life or kind of what I did, it was always like, well, that's what I really wanted to do. So I finally had the opportunity.
So we're here to talk about the FedEx line haul contracting business that you operate. And so how did you first hear about it? I mean, it's very niche. I mean, over the road trucking and transportation is a huge, huge industry. And this is just one small corner of it. How did you hear about it?
Dude, geez. So my partner now, he's around, talk about him all the time, Darius. We were on the job together. And at the time, we weren't flying in airplanes. We had this ground gig. So you put on all, your tack gear, look big and mean. And it was just kind of a lot of sitting around waiting for something to happen. And nothing really ever happened. So we'd be in the back of, a Suburban just talking, you just have a lot of time to bond with the people who you're with. And we had a similar mindset in the sense of we knew we had this entrepreneurial gene, like love serving the public. He was military, Air Force for 12 years, I want to say, and then got into, federal law enforcement. So we'd given, 20 plus years to the government. And we knew that we had a desire to kind of take money, build it, side hustle. And original goal actually was to buy a commercial, go like to a college town, buy a multi-unit place and then rent it out to college kids. Something easy, you know, at the time, like that's what it was. The cool thing to do was real estate, commercial real estate. One day he shows up and he had heard from a buddy of his that, hey, you can own FedEx runs and it's a great business. And I'm like, what are you talking about? The people that deliver the packages to your door don't actually work for FedEx. That makes no sense. They drive the trucks, they have the shirts, like duh. And so I looked into it, and everybody goes down that same rabbit hole, right? Once you start, it's like, what is this? What in the world is this whole process? How does this work? Did a ton of research, probably for a good year. And at the time, like line haul doesn't pop up. It's all home delivery, right? It's owning those businesses and easy to grow. And, you know, if you own a business in 3 years, you'll make your initial investment back and then the rest is gravy, but then you can grow it. And we got pretty deep into that. But at some point it was just, this probably isn't for us. I think we had decided that the home delivery, like that's a little too intense. We don't have the time for that. We can't give them what they want. And then the line haul popped up, and in the time we knew about line haul, but the idea of owning semi trucks is what? Like I'm not a trucker. Like I can't drive a truck. What if it breaks down? You know, how do you own this business successfully? Geez, the guy I was living with, who, you know, rented a room from him, he put me in touch with somebody, who put me in touch with somebody, and finally I got in touch with at the time it wasn't the BDS, but now the position would be the BDS in Woodbridge. Met with him, and he ended up giving us 2 unassigned runs to start our career with, which at the time was very unique. They weren't giving away these unassigned runs. They weren't like welcoming new people into the mix as if you weren't buying in.
What year was this?
2014 is when we actually got the unassigned runs.
2014. Okay.
Yep. And so, you know, bought some trucks, had to figure out how to do that. Luckily, Darius, his dad's in trucking, his brother's a diesel mechanic. Both of us are really good researchers. If we don't have the information, we kind of will just obsess over just figuring out, how does this work? And to this day, we're both still like that. And we made it work. And so hiring drivers and, you know, figuring out how to run them and truck maintenance issues. We figured it out as we went along. We made so many mistakes in those early years. We just cost ourselves so much money, but it's a learning process. You figure it out as you go along. And here we are, you know, still FedExing, still trucking 10 years later.
So you started out in 2014. You were given 2 unassigned runs. Now, I expect that many of the audience tuning into this podcast, probably most of them know about this industry, so they know what you're talking about. But just to provide a little bit of background in case there are people who don't already have exposure to this industry. So whenever you see a truck that has the FedEx logo driving down the road, there's a subtitle section under it, and it'll either say ground, freight, express, or custom critical. If it says ground, FedEx ground, those trucks are not owned by FedEx Corporation, and the driver in the driver's seat is not employed by FedEx. They're actually owned and operated by independent contractors who have an agreement with FedEx to show up at a place and a time at a specific package sorting facility. And in the case of line haul, which is the over-the-road trucking portion of that, they hook up to a trailer, and they're responsible for getting that trailer from point A to point B in a timely and safe manner. The other part of FedEx Ground is what you were talking about, which is the home delivery side, or the business delivery side, which are the walk-in step vans or smaller vans, which actually deliver the packages to your doorstep. But we're talking about line haul, hooking up to a larger trailer, getting it from point A to point B. So you entered the business in 2014. You got 2 unassigned runs for free, which is great. Did you have your commercial driver's license yourself at that time?
No, never. Neither of us did. And the plan was to get it at some point, and it still hasn't happened yet for either of us. So,
but you've been able to make do without it.
Exactly. And I think it's a good thing that we didn't. From our perspective, it was better for us to focus on the business, the growth of the business, and really force ourselves to rely on really good drivers and a good team to support us while we were steering the ship. So learning to properly recruit and hire the right people for your team, I think, is going to be absolutely essential for any line haul contractor, and any business owner. Small business ownership is being able to rely on people to assist you in that growth.
For sure. And we're going to get into some of the fundamentals that you feel like it takes to be successful in this business. But let's go back to those early days. So you get in, you've got 2 trucks. You'd already mentioned that you made a ton of mistakes early on. Tell us a little bit more about that. What were some of the mistakes that you made in the early days of being a contractor?
It was, you say, like, forest from the trees analogy, being stingy at some points, not spending properly on maintenance, not, hey, we can get another week with those tires. They're fine. No, that's a terrible mindset to have. When money is tight and you are, hemorrhaging cash because your truck isn't running, you sometimes make the wrong decisions. Hey, we can go cheaper on this to save some money, and that always ends up being, and from our perception, that's always been the wrong decision. When we're making that decision, it's like, you know what? We're doing something wrong at this point. We need to kind of rebalance our priorities when we're thinking about, what in store for the business. So a lot of it is, the financial aspect of it. One huge thing, and it's one of the dumbest mistakes I've made until very lately. I've made the biggest mistake of my life, it feels like, as of right now. And I'm sure we can get to that. But we had a bookkeeper, although it didn't really work out well. And we were so focused on everything else. And, oh, by the way, our full-time jobs that we're traveling the world while we're trying to run this business. We weren't doing our withholding our 941s. So we weren't setting the money aside, and we just didn't realize it. And so 3 quarters in a row, things were great in early 2015. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoops, you guys owe hundreds of thousands of dollars for your 941. We're like, where the hell are we supposed to get this money from? And so that's probably the biggest mistake, is just I'll call it now stupidity, but it's more ignorance, and it's focusing on, as a small business owner, you have to be in control of everything. And it's the stuff that you do really well, but also the stuff that, you don't really feel like dealing with. Obviously, it's critical as well that you are either, making sure somebody is staying on top of that for you. And that was a rough time, Luckily for us, I had just dipped my toe into you can sell these runs for some cash. There's a demand for these businesses, and we were able to do our first sale really just to get the IRS off our back. So challenging times.
Challenging for sure. Yeah. Now, when I hear that story, especially as this is one of the first, if not your first, entrance into entrepreneurship, which it absolutely is. I want to be clear about that. Yes, FedEx has tremendous marketing power behind them to drive package volume. When you're involved in one of these businesses, you don't have to worry about sales. How are we going to get our next sales? Those happen. You don't have to worry about marketing. The job is more about recruiting, keeping your overhead low, having a solid strategy around trucks. But man, yeah, not paying your taxes as your first entrance into entrepreneurship, Rick, a lot of people would probably say, forget this. I mean, this was a catastrophic mistake. You weren't a millionaire where it's like, oh, a few $100,000, that's a bad day, but we can absorb it. That was potentially catastrophic. So you sold those 2 runs. Did you make, you got them for free. So I know you made a profit on those.
There's probably a good year, 18-month gap in between those, and we grew aggressively. So that's one thing we did as well. Once we got a little taste of running these runs, we wanted the next one and the next one. And going to the terminal and getting that next run, starting to run teams, that was all in line with those early days. So we were buying runs, the prices were significantly cheaper that back then, but we didn't come in, we didn't have money. We had good salaries. We had great health benefits for our families. Our families were going to eat, but it wasn't like we came in with a ton of cash to buy and grow. It was just hustle, and it was credit cards. I bought an unassigned team run with a ton of points on it because I knew the points game at the time, with I want to say like $40,000 on a Discover credit card at I took the cash option at like 40%. I mean, 40% interest I paid on this card. But I was like, we had a really good peak season, and I have these points, and we bought it in like January. And it's like, I've dumped the points on here. I really think this could be something, and it upgraded to a phenomenal run. And I think that's the one that we had sold as part of the deal to pay off the IRS. So it was kind of just knowing the process. And that's something we did well in those early days, is we kind of knew where to get the runs from. We knew how to play the game, and we were upgrading runs constantly, just because it was much simpler at that time to do it. SRS score, it was a different time. It was just points. You just had to have the most points, and you needed to really understand that ecosystem of how that hub's points worked. And we did it well for a couple of years.
So you grew aggressively. You were really bootstrapping. I mean, putting huge amounts, or at least for someone brand new, day job, big dollar amounts putting on a credit card to grow the business.
Yeah. We took money. It was, and I think this is something we did not take. And, if anybody's listening to this, you're supposed to take a salary, obviously, off the S Corp. We took no money until probably 2019. We started giving ourselves small salaries. It was all going back into the business. Luckily, we had full-time jobs where, we were fine regardless, but it wasn't like we were getting rich off of FedEx in those early years.
So what did that growth trajectory look like? You started with 2, and then you operated for a few years through 2018, 2019, and we'll get into 2020 and the recession. Mm-hmm. How many trucks did you get up to, and how did those break down between assigned, unassigned, and spare trucks?
No chance I could answer that with any honesty. I will say, though, that Darius in 2015 got us our own authority. He was big on that, being able to not have all of our eggs in one basket. And so we got our own authority, and we started running trucks outside of FedEx. And that, for anybody listening, if your goal is to run a separate trucking company parallel to your FedEx business, phenomenal, great opportunity. There's plenty of ways to make good money in trucking, but make sure you do it with 2 separate corporations. Don't try to run them both under the same corporation, because the insurance company for your other trucking is going to have a real problem when they find out that you own lots of FedEx trucks under that same entity that you are not insuring under that policy. So that's something we dealt with for quite a while. And so the growth was a lot of back and forth at times. And it's one thing that kind of FedEx saved us in 2016. Anybody remembers who was around, there was all these ships that couldn't dock on California. There was embargo issue where they were just all sitting there, and freight really slowed down in 16. And I think it was worse than we're experiencing right now. And so for us, we had 4 or 5 trucks that were, just stopped. We just couldn't. The rates plummeted. And luckily, Ray, who's the manager at Woodbridge still to this day, he saved us, because I was complaining to him one day. He's like, "What? You got trucks? Bring them here." It's like, "We don't have any runs, dude." He's like, "Dude, just bring them here." And they ran. And Woodbridge had need for trucks. FedEx was still pushing. e-commerce was still growing, and the rest of the industry was stagnant for many months. And we were just running in Woodbridge doing those team runs. And luckily our trucks were white that we had purchased, and we bought sleepers. So we were just teaming. And that was our first taste of that aggressive teaming, those wild runs, just run them. And had a great team, and they were willing to kind of go the extra mile for us, learned the importance of having a team that's flexible, that, is well taken care of. And we grew from there. And so that was my taste of, I can just have trucks and run them. Okay, we need more, right? It's always more. And so at that point, we had been for a couple of years financing trucks and getting leases from Penske, Ryder, a company called Miller in those early days up in the Northeast. We were getting trucks, and I say our truck count between both businesses probably climbed into the 60s and 70s range. I want to say on our like Schedule A1, or it was our Schedule A at the time. We might have hit like 50 to 60 runs, but it was sloppy. It was a terrible business to own, and we were miserable because we had so many runs spread out all over the place. It was Tennessee, Florida, Georgia, Virginia, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and other states, I'm sure. And it was just one or two runs in those places. And having an infrastructure, you think you can just run it. We'll just run it. But it was the little small details. Hey, we got a new driver, but how do we get him trained? How do you train this guy on doubles? What happens if the ELD log is bad and you need to get him a new one? So it was just sloppy. And so that was kind of, we understood that, yes, this revenue is amazing. Wow, we're making so much money, but we were just miserable being on the phone all the time. And that was my first kind of inkling of, hey, we're going to consolidate. We're going to sell off a lot of this. And I started doing that probably 18 and 19, which led me to really aggressively start selling these runs, these businesses. I did it, started with our own, kind of started doing it for other contractors who knew what I was doing. And I did it under a pseudonym for a long time. I was Mike Linehall, just because I didn't think FedEx would be okay with a contractor, also being a broker at the time. And I was wrong about that when Spencer hit the market. So that's when I was like, well, here I am. I can do this too. And so it was, that and to get to 2020, but we had sold off a lot by that point, just because we knew we had made a mistake. We're way too aggressive and just did it wrong, and suffered the consequences to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of ready, fire, aim. You wanted to grow, bootstrapping, putting things on your credit cards, and you grew and you had a large successful business, but you were spread too thin. That happens a lot. Okay, so you downsized, you started to sell off trucks, sell off routes. Tell us a little bit about 2020 and the COVID pandemic and recession, and how did that impact the trucking industry, or more specifically, the FedEx linehaul contracting business?
It didn't. For us, it didn't. And we can get into specifics, right? But there was a couple of weeks where, obviously guys couldn't work because they had COVID. Well, that was rough. We had, right before then, and as I mentioned, we were downsizing our business. I happened to meet the assistant manager of the new Allentown Lehigh 182 terminal. And okay, we could use some trucks, and we had some trucks. And so we brought a lot of trucks over to the brand new hub that ended up turning into nice, beautiful, dedicated, AM runs, team runs. So we had a nice Lehigh-based business going into the pandemic, and those runs ran. And still, Lehigh is a phenomenal terminal, great place to operate. And they've always taken good care of us and all the contractors. They run their stuff. Their unassigned boards run well comparatively to a lot of the other places we've operated. And I didn't see this just huge downturn when it came to COVID, either in the trucking industry, because right after that, I mean, we started printing money, right? Like PPP came. Oh, well, there's a bunch of money. That's, the first PPP loan or grant took care of any of the negatives that we had experienced. But you had drivers that couldn't work, and for us, it was just about, like we're doing right now, just maintaining, right? Not looking for that growth. But the benefit of FedEx is you have that dedicated run, it goes, and that revenue always stays the same. It's not this, up and down volatile rates like the rest of the trucking industry. It's very consistent. And that's why I love FedEx, for the consistency that it brings. And if anything, the fuel for anybody, the one thing that you think about in the trucking industry is obviously, well, fuel's really expensive right now. So we have to manage those costs. And you do. And in FedEx, you certainly do. But FedEx, compared to the rest of the industry, our reliance on the cost of fuel and our obsession with it is significantly lower, because we get the fuel surcharge as part of it. And that's, it goes up and it's tied into what the price of fuel is. So when fuel spikes really high, we get more revenue. Your money you're getting every week is significantly higher based on the fact that it's tied to fuel. But then it goes low and your revenue comes back down. And the answer for a FedEx contractor isn't we want fuel to be as low as possible. That's not right at all. There's a nice little bell-shaped curve, and you want it to be kind of right in the middle. And it gets too expensive, then yes, your fuel's really high. But if it gets too low, it's also, you're not getting enough revenue to pay your expenses with as well. And so as FedEx contractors, we do want the fuel to be able to buy it as inexpensively as possible. But in the larger grand scheme of things, it's not as much of a concern as it is with my other trucking company that we run, where there's no fuel surcharge coming to save the day. That's for sure.
So, Rick, you've been doing this for a long time at this point. You've gone through good times, bad times, learned a lot of lessons along the way. What would you say are like the top 2 or 3 mistakes that you see a lot of other line haul contractors make, particularly when they're maybe newer in the business?
So I think, and I promise this isn't a plug, but
it's okay to plug. You're here on the show, so plug away.
A new contractor thinking that this business is simple, right? Oh, I can do that. If he can do it, I can do it. You can do it. Anybody can do it, right? But it's being overly cocky is the word when you're thinking about this business. Yes, our P&L is really easy to understand. You have one source of revenue. It comes in Friday every week. That money's there. You don't have to go chase it, and you have your expenses. You got to pay your payroll. The fuel comes directly out of the settlement statement. You have to pay your truck, right? And then the maintenance on that truck. But you can go get a lease and not even worry about that. And there's a couple other little things that come into play, smaller line items, simple to understand. You look at the P&L like, oh, this business is easy. It's those nuances that really throw people off. It's this is how FedEx operates. And this is the stuff you just have to pick up over time. So people come into the game not expecting it to be as challenging, and not giving those first couple of months while you're becoming a contractor the time that it deserves, or you really can be preparing to be a contractor before you actually start running. The worst case scenario in that I've seen is people start day one and they're just not ready. And it's like, okay, I can figure it out as I go along. Of course you can. But when you are trying to hire drivers, push them through First Advantage, that is a very complicated process. Let's be honest. Like, getting a driver through First Advantage when you're not familiar and you have nobody to assist you in that process can be very challenging. But now at the same time, you got to manage your safety, right? You got to be watching the videos, make sure your drivers are being professional. You have to coordinate with the terminal. You have to get the entirety of your business set up and figure out your bookkeeping and managing costs. So it's everything that gets thrown at you at once. So the biggest mistake, I think, that isn't necessarily a mistake, it's just a lot of times you don't know, is not being prepared that first week when things matter from day one, where you're going to get declines. And if your driver gets pulled over and didn't have the right things in the cab that they needed, and now you have CSA violations, so your SRS score tanks from the first week, well, that's going to be a tough hole to climb out of because you don't have the miles to offset those points that you got. That's the challenge, right? It's being prepared. So there's other very specific things, but I think the overarching concern for me is people who come in and just aren't prepared to deal with the nuances.
That's great. Now, when you look at the other end of the spectrum, when you see the line haul contractors who are the most successful, the most profitable, have the best reputation in FedEx's eyes, what are the one or two things that you consistently see from operators like that you feel like you would want to apply to your own business or that other people should apply?
I think that I believe that as an entrepreneur, nobody does everything well. You cannot manage effectively the entirety of the business cycle by yourself. There's so many vendors in this space now that weren't there 10 years ago that shore up a lot of any of your deficiencies that you have as a business owner, as what you want to do, as to better your business. There's people who will help. And so I think the people who do well and who grow and are, making plenty of money, they're just finding a good way to balance it all out. And they're seeking help and relying on help as their business continues to scale. And they're able to train that help, whether it's your admin, your lead driver, your operations manager, your safety person. They're able to train those people to produce the results that they need for that business to help them manage it effectively, right? So it's the people that are between you and your drivers that can help you manage that business. So as you grow, you have to scale. You have to rely on that help. And luckily today, there's just so many people that for a very reasonable cost are willing, are going to help you step in and do that for you. Now if before, the early days, right? It's Tuesday night, the settlement comes out, right? So you get your settlement statement and you're like, and it hasn't changed, by the way. FedEx, still the exact same website and the exact same, ugly sheet that people try to work through. And you have to say, well, did I get paid for all my miles? That truck left 89 and went to 62 and, did it make it back? Well, it didn't make it back. So what do I do now? And I got to fill out this whole process. Complicated, right? Now you have multiple softwares, Hollytech, Tim Goff's got a good one. There's a bunch of them, name them all, but you don't have to do that anymore. Just cut 2 hours out of my life. Thanks, guys. That's a really big help. Whatever it costs me to have that software, to not have to look for missing miles, missing fuel surcharges, to total it up for me. God, geez. And now I can run trends. Now I can look at it for the year. Hey, what did my year look like? We couldn't do that before. It was Excel. I did payroll on the back of a napkin some weeks, just trying to figure out what I owe these guys. Now that's done for you. Simple. You're running teams and you need a team and you haven't gotten your recruiting and your first advantage. You're not caught up to speed with that. There's many phenomenal recruiters that will make sure that you have drivers, you have butts in the seats, so your trucks aren't sitting. So I took a lot of time to answer that question, and it's balance and it's relying on great people to help you run this business.
Tell us about Linehaul Solutions.
Linehaul Solutions is a phenomenal little company servicing the FedEx linehaul space. I was brokering these deals, and I was basically playing middleman at times. But a lot of what I was doing was assisting people coming in and just consulting. In a lot of cases, not getting paid for it. Sometimes I was, which was really nice. And so I saw this space and I knew what was going on in the sales, right? We quit selling for a while during COVID. We had a nice big sale during COVID and didn't really work that hard for a year. And a buddy of mine came to me and he had knew somebody who had bought a FedEx business. And I was like, why didn't you tell him to call me? And he's like, I didn't know, And so I said, all right, send me the deal, because he had some specific questions. I looked at it and I was like, damn, like this sucks, sorry. Like, I can't believe you paid money for this. And I started digging into it and I saw the information that they were given, and I'm being as vague as possible right now, but essentially there were brokers selling these businesses, listing these businesses. And I don't think they were giving the buyers the support that they needed to be successful. They were giving their sellers, the people they were making commission off of, lots of support, but I knew that sellers don't need support. We have the information. All you really need is a place to list the business and someone to deal with the buyers, right? But you had people playing the middle and playing both sides and then determining the value of the business at the same time. And I just felt there was a huge conflict of interest. So I said, you know what? I'm ready to get back into the game, but I want to do it from the buyer side. So I want to represent buyers. I want to be a buyer's agent, and I am not going to take a commission off of these deals. I'm going to take a flat fee to help the buyers from start. We'll negotiate, make sure they're getting a business that is legit, that the runs actually exist, what they're buying, but then walk them through the process. How do you set up a corporation? How do you prepare for the LIM meeting? How do you write an RFI and a business plan? What do you do afterwards? What do you need to buy immediately? Your safety equipment. Do you want to go with, XRS, or do you want to go with Trimble and Lytx versus GroundCloud, and why? What's the benefits? What truck do you want to buy? Do you want to lease? Do you want to go to REL? Do you want to buy? Well, if you're going to buy, what truck makes the most sense? There's just so many answers that I have off the top of my head because I've obsessed over this business model for 10 years that I felt were very, very relevant. And then afterwards you close, having that support. So Linehaul Solutions is just really designed to take somebody new through that process very effectively, give them the training they need. We started a boot camp. We did an 8-week boot camp just to train new buyers on what this space is. And the whole goal is to get the day one comes and there's not that deer in the headlights. Oh my God, what do I do now? And we've taken, I don't know the number, but I want to say in probably the 20s now this year, people through. And it's been, I think all of those new contractors are in a good place. And I'd like to think in a large part, it's because of the sweat and the effort that we put into their business alongside them and helping them be able to really put that sweat equity into the business so they can be successful. So Linehaul Solutions, check us out. We'd love to help you.
Yeah. And people who want to reach out to you, Rick, for Linehaul Solutions or otherwise, what are the best ways to reach you?
So I'm not a hard person to get in touch with. I'm around, but my website, our website is linehaul.info, not .com, .info. And you can certainly get in touch with me very simply, but my cell phone number is out there. I want to be very available for right now. That's not going to be a forever thing, but for right now, I want to get this space, to a point where I think new contractors can come in and be successful and know they have lots of support and plenty of not people who are going to offer the services for free. There's lots of contractors that'll just have a conversation with you, answer questions. It's very simple to get a very solid answer from a contractor who's extremely experienced in this space if you just know where to find them.
Well, I think that's noble and needed. So, Rick, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Again, everyone, Thanks, this man. Is Rick Dunn with DXP and Linehaul Solutions. And I appreciate you, Rick. Thanks for coming on. You have a great day.
Yep, this is going to be fun. I look forward to watching your shows in the future. That's for sure.
Routing for Success is brought to you by AP Equipment Financing. In today's competitive market, it is essential to acquire the right trucks at a fair price and finance them in a way that makes sense for your business. Leveraging their extensive network of truck and van suppliers, the experts at AP Equipment Financing will help you locate the best deals on step vans, cutaways, panel vans, and more. Deliver them straight to your facility and finance them with low monthly installment options. Click the link in the description or visit apfinancing.com for more information. Routing for Success is an independent production of AP Equipment Financing and is in no way affiliated with or endorsed by FedEx Corporation, FedEx Ground, Amazon, or any other logistics company discussed herein. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Routing for Success.